So I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker today. His name is Edwin Marty. We're very lucky to have him today. He is the city's new food policy program manager within the Office of Sustainability. He's got a BA in anthropology from the University of Oregon, and he has written several books about urban farming and is very excited about giving you guys an overview of the big picture of the local food system and how that relates to sustainable landscaping. I think this is kind of a unique opportunity for him to speak to an audience he doesn't usually get to speak to. Since you all are such a professional audience, I think it'll be a really good introduction and a nice way to set the stage for the rest of today's talks. So without further ado, because we are a bit limited on time, I'm going to introduce Edwin Marty, and I'll go ahead and pass out the agenda to you all as well. Thank you very much for being here. Thanks.
Thanks so much, guys. I'm excited to share with you what I do at the city, and hopefully we'll explore some things about our local food system and talk about how that relates to what you guys do as professionals in the landscape world. I do feel obligated to start out with a joke about the city of Austin closing on a cloudy day, recognizing, of course, that I think prudence is a good thing and caution is a good thing. I want to make sure nobody gets hurt, but it is kind of funny that it's kind of cloudy and we closed for 2 hours. I had the privilege of working in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia for about a year. Has anybody been to Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia? If you don't know where it is, right in between China and Russia, coldest capital city on the earth. Showed up for work in February and was negative 40. Didn't get above freezing until sometime in June. So I learned very quickly that when you go to work in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, you have to get a tire, fill it with straw, slide it under the car, light it on fire, let the engine block thaw out, push it out of the way once you get your car started. So a couple things there. A, that was a difficult place to work. We are very fortunate to live in Austin, where cloudy days can sometimes lead to closures. Sustainability, however, is a little bit different thought. They do make great things that you can plug your car into that thaw off your engine block. But, you know, some places in the world you don't have electricity, and a tire filled with straw might be an adequate substitute. But from a sustainability point of view, obviously that's a disaster. What I want to talk about today, speaking of sustainability, is what I do at the city of Austin, what a local food system is, and how it relates to what you guys do as professionals. So got a little infographic up here basically describing what a food system is. Quick survey, because I'm always interested. Anybody use the term food system or familiar with the term food system? I know one person in the audience, a couple folks. Well, I'm going to explore what that means and why it's important, and then how it relates to my job. So to get started, we'll cover my job as a food policy manager, some of the things I'm working on in terms of developing an accurate picture of what does our food system look like and what does our sustainable food system look like, and then some of the specifics that we'll be working on. So what is a food policy manager? We start out by saying that generally cities have not regulated or have not necessarily involved holistic food system work until very recently. Most cities regulated the food system. Anybody want to tell me how traditionally cities regulate the food system? Anybody take a guess? Anybody been to a restaurant recently? Anybody been to a restaurant and seen like a number 55 written on the wall? Hopefully you didn't see that in Austin. Health departments generally are the way that city regulates a food system by ensuring that we have a safe supply of food. And that's fantastic. We have an incredibly safe and efficient food system, and part of that has to do with the way that the city regulates our food system. But moving forward in the last, say, 5-10 years, cities have recognized that there's some other things that a city can do to improve the way our food system works. And what do I mean by food system? Let me scoot back. So I'm going to scoot forward. The food system basically is how does the food get from where it's produced to where it ends up? Very simple thought, but it's important to recognize that a food system should be a circular process. It should start somewhere with the production, go to processing, distribution, consumption, and waste, or what we call in Austin resource recovery, and that resource recovery then links back to the production. And we'll talk a lot about that today, and that's hopefully where a lot of you all as professionals in the landscaping world can have a huge impact, is recognizing that instead of having a linear food system, we have hopefully a circular food system where as much of the waste product or the resources are going back into the production of our food, but not just the production of our food, just really the entire landscaping process. So what cities have recognized is that we can be very involved in the efficiency and the effectiveness of creating a more circular food system, and that can have a lot of implications that can be hopefully very positive for other things besides just ensuring that we have a safe food system. So fast forward a couple of years ago, the City of Austin created the Sustainable Food Policy Board. Just out of curiosity, is anybody familiar with the Sustainable Food Policy Board? A couple folks here. Basically, the City of Austin has a very unique way of getting feedback from the general public. It's called a boards and commissions. We have 90-something boards and commissions where you, the general public, can join a board or be appointed by a city council member to be on a board and give the city council feedback on how things should be working. It's basically the extension of the city's way to get experts' opinions on very specific topics. Most city council members are not experts on the food system, so we created a food policy council so that we have 13 experts that can give city council members very specific information about how the food system could be working. So one of the recommendations that the Sustainable Food Policy Board made was to create this job that I have called the Food Policy Manager. And the idea was, in addition to looking at ensuring a safe food system, that we also have this thing called Imagine Austin. Is everybody familiar with Imagine Austin? Anybody not familiar with it? It's our 30-year comprehensive plan. It's basically the city's attempt to say, in 30 years, this is where we want to be. Instead of just saying, well, it's going to regulate this today and regulate that today, let's think strategically down the road, where should we as a city go? And they went out as a community, got input from lots and lots of different people and created a fairly extensive and fairly large comprehensive plan. Embedded in that plan is a lot of stuff about our food system and how our food system should work, and a lot of things that are probably impacting you that you may or may not even know about. So I would encourage you to look up Imagine Austin and get involved with the comprehensive plan. A lot of fun things, a lot of great things, a lot of discussion about sustainability. How do we sustain ourselves economically, environmentally, et cetera? So the food system is mentioned numerous times in Imagine Austin. And my job is essentially to take where we are today in our food system and try to get us to where we want to be according to Imagine Austin in 30 years, which includes increasing local food production, decreasing the amount of synthetic pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers that are used in our local food production and landscaping in general, trying to decrease food insecurity, trying to make basically a more holistic, better food system. So that's basically what the role of a food policy manager is to sort of think about where we want to be and how do we get from where we are today to where we want to be. Now, the challenge, of course, is that the city doesn't necessarily have direct influence over a lot of parts of our food system. While we do regulate, again, restaurants, things like that, my job is to get out and talk to people like you and try to encourage you to be involved and try to help me achieve these long-term goals, which hopefully will help us all create a better, more sustainable community. So 8 months ago, I started, pretty blank slate, tried to look at where we can go, how do we create this idealistic local food system, met a bunch of people, talked to a lot of people, spent literally months meeting people, learning about how the food system works. And one of the things I think it's important to recognize is while we have this idealistic food system that we're trying to develop, our current food system is very much a global food system. We get about half of all our fruits and vegetables from another country. We get about 150 countries supply our food system. About 3/4 of our seafood comes from another country. So just in terms of how that idealistic food system works, the reality is that it's a global food system. And so as we look at how do we influence and create a more local food system, we have to recognize that we're not really in control of a lot of the pieces, but we can. And so what I've been working on is trying to figure out where are the pieces and where are the levers of potential control that we can push and create a better food system. Maybe a quick note. We do have a very safe and effective and efficient food system as it stands now. A global food system provides incredible food at a very cheap price, a very affordable price, but there's some real challenges. And what I saw over the last 6 months is some of the gaps in our food system, some of the challenges of our global food system. Not everybody gets access to food in the same way. The demand is not necessarily consistent across the food chain. And then some of the things that the city's doing currently are not necessarily working to help us achieve a better, more holistic food system. So one of the things I saw first and foremost was that we don't always do a great job of the city of communicating externally to you guys, the general public, and specifically professionals about things that might be impacting you in your job. So working with folks like Meredith Gray at PARD and some of the other folks around the city, we've started the process of trying to consolidate all the codes and regulations and permits that impact the food system into one place. And so we created a food portal. And I've got some flyers here that I'll leave up front if you're interested in the website, austintexas.gov/food. It basically is broken into 4 pieces, into growing, selling, eating, and composting food. And if you're interested in any one of those sectors, you simply click on the icon, and it takes you to resources that you might need to get involved with any one of those sectors, and then also the permits and regulations that affect your ability to do those things. So for instance, say you wanted to start an urban farm. You could click on growing food and find out all the resources that are available to you wanting to start an urban farm, and then find out the regulations or the permits and fees that you might need to get started on that. It's a work in progress. Eventually, we're going to have a streamlined question and answer process where you'll be able to go in and just answer questions about what you're looking for and end up with very specific information. Not quite there yet. Give us a little bit more time, but please do go to the website and let us know if it's helpful, and if it's not helpful, how it could be better. So we certainly would love to have your appreciation. We do recognize that our role at the city is to help you. And if our regulatory process is hindering you from doing your job, we're not doing our job. And it's hard a lot of times for us as the city to do that, especially when it comes to the health department. They're working tirelessly day and night to ensure that you're not getting sick when you go to a restaurant from some bad food. They're working tirelessly to make sure that your family and your whole community is safe. So that's their primary goal, and they're under-resourced in many ways, and so it's hard sometimes to shift to be customer-facing. But that's one of the things that I'm trying to do, is help us hear from you and figure out how to be more responsive to systems that will work for the folks that make the food system really work. So that said, the next thing I recognized was we don't really even know where we're starting with our food system. We've got a little bit of information, but it would be helpful to dive in and have a better starting place. So decided to develop a State of the Food System report that we're working on right now. I'll be publishing it in the next maybe month. And it's basically going to be a snapshot. What does our food system look like? And for you, the professional, you'll be able to look through the State of the Food System report, have a better understanding of the local issues in our food system, how they relate perhaps to the work that you do, and hopefully you'll find some opportunities to plug in and both improve the community, but also perhaps find some business niches that you didn't understand or didn't see before. So again, education, links to existing goals, and hopefully ending up with some priorities for some action of how we can make our food system work better. Again, limits to that. Limits to my role. There's only so much that we're doing directly. Again, you all, professionals and the general public, are the people that actually make our food system work. And there's some challenges in that we don't have a lot of data about our food system. Food system thinking is kind of a new thing, if you will. It's really only been used in academia for, say, 20 years and really in the general public for 5 years. And so to try to gather data about our food system can be challenging because it's kind of a new thing. Hopefully we'll be publishing this food system report on a regular basis, which will give us the capacity to start tracking trends over time. And that's where it'll get a lot more interesting, is we'll be able to see which direction we're going in terms of developing a local sustainable food system. So we've broken the report down into 4 basic sections: growing, selling, eating, and composting food. I'm going to start with the growing section, and we're going to basically just explore a couple metrics around each one of the sections, talk about some basic takeaways, and then look at what the city's doing in each one of those sections. Some interesting things in terms of growing food. We lose 9 acres a day of farmland in the city of Austin, and that's, hopefully you share that sentiment. That's a lot of land to be losing every single day. So from yesterday to today, there were 9 acres of land that was either developed or lost to agriculture. One of the goals that's stated in Imagine Austin is that we should be increasing local food production because we know it's economically, it's very sensible, it's better for nutrition, it's better for access, etc. However, if we're losing 9 acres a day of farmland, it's going to be really hard for us to increase local food production. We're actually going the wrong direction. So one of the challenges is to look at what are the strategies for preserving farmland, for sort of shifting that trend in a different direction. And there are a tremendous number of challenges. Anybody bought a large tract of property recently in the city of Austin? pretty expensive. A lot of demands on that tract of land. And in addition, we're about 50,000 units short of affordable housing in the city of Austin. So we've got this huge demand for more affordable housing, huge demand from a development point of view, and yet we're losing farmland at an incredibly fast rate. So one of my jobs is to figure out how to create that balance. And how do we figure out, can we create more affordable housing? Can we ensure that development still continues so our economy stays strong? And can we preserve farmland so that 20 years from now we actually still have the capacity for local food production? On the other side of that, we've got this incredible demand for community gardens and school gardens and urban farms. The work that Meredith does at PARD has been incredibly fruitful in terms of developing community gardens on City of Austin property. We've got dozens of community gardens on City of Austin property, as well as community gardens on private property, and a pretty impressive demand for those. Lots of school gardens, lots of urban farms. I would say, as landscape professionals, I would hope that all of you would recognize that there are incredible opportunities to be involved in making your community stronger through getting involved with a local community garden and school garden. But frankly, there's also, I think, some pretty exciting business opportunities. One of the things that I would love to see is a better partnering between the landscape professionals and community gardens and school gardens, and frankly, nonprofit urban farms. I think it's, for one, a really easy opportunity for you to get your name out and to develop trust and embed yourself in a community that could hopefully lead to some good business opportunities. And then two, hopefully it would make your community stronger. So if you're interested in that, Meredith or myself are very interested in talking to you about how to link you up with some local projects that are happening. One of the dreams that I have is that every single community in Austin has access to a community garden. Currently, we have about 52 community gardens, which is great, but I'd love to see that number double or tripled in the next couple of years. And so that's going to only happen with folks like you helping. And then my other aspiration in terms of growing food would be that every single elementary school has a community or has access to a community garden or its own school garden. For me, school gardens are a fantastic way to increase what I call food literacy. Students everywhere understanding exactly where their food comes from, the whole process for growing food, and then it's a really great outdoor science laboratory. So it's not even just about nutrition or food literacy. It's really about ensuring that every kid has an opportunity to learn in the learning style that works best for them. And a lot of times kids only learn by doing. If they sit in a classroom, they're not going to learn nearly as effective as they would if they were in a garden setting. So how do we get from 77% of AISD schools with gardens to 100%? Well, we're certainly not going to do that alone, and folks like you are really the only way that that's going to happen. So again, fantastic opportunity to link up with a school that doesn't have a school garden, embed yourself in a community, get to know that community, build that trust, hopefully build a customer base. I do want to mention that there's some great organizations like the Sustainable Food Center working hard on developing school gardens and making them more effective. They're a wonderful organization to partner with. And then also Master Gardener Program is a fantastic organization to partner with if you haven't already, to get involved with school gardens. So outside of the demand for community gardens and school gardens and urban farms, it's worth noting that we have about 3 days worth of food in our city. Is everybody aware of that? Anybody not know that? So basically, grocery stores can only be efficient and effective and therefore profitable if they keep their inventory very low. So the idea is you're turning the food over constantly. So the current model of grocery stores is you keep about 3 days worth of food in the warehouse. And that's great because we have very effective, efficient, profitable grocery stores, especially here in Austin. But there's some interesting questions that you might raise about 3 days worth of food, especially on a terrible weather day like we're having today. If there was actually ice, what would happen in 4 days? For me, that gets to be a very important question, especially as a new father of 2 little girls. I want to make sure that they're secure, but also think it's maybe an impetus to think long and hard about where does our food come from, what happens if, contingency plans, do we really want to lose all of our local food production to development if we only have 3 days worth of food in our grocery stores. Other issues to look at: average age of the Austin farmer is 62. It's about 3 or 4 years older than the average Texan farmer, and a couple years older than the average American farmer. So what happens in 3 years when all of those farmers retire? Well, they're actually not all going to retire because farmers don't ever really retire, but they are getting older, and it's a significant growth rate of their age. And so hopefully we'll figure out a way to get more people to farm, or all the farmland that we're preserving and all the demand for these other things isn't going to make any real impact. So, and then lastly, farm workers, $11,000 a year, roughly average salary. Some of you might be able to understand that equation. Perhaps you are on the same par with some local farm workers. And having done that for a significant portion of my life, I can empathize. But it's certainly something that when we look at these other equations, really trying to figure out how do we give farm workers, or how do we create the capacity for farming to be a more profitable enterprise? So a couple big picture takeaways. Farmland preservation is really critical to the future of Austin. We're producing a minuscule amount of our food. Roughly about 0.8% of the food that we consume in Austin is produced in Austin or Travis County. So again, that's 0.8%. So about 99.2% of the food that we eat comes from somewhere else. We're losing a lot of money. We don't know exactly how much, but I would say in the hundreds of millions of dollars of product that could be produced locally that there's a demand for that product that we're just simply importing. And then on the other side of that, again, great pressure from the local community to produce more food. Some of the things that we're working on, we already touched on Parks and Rec, doing lots of stuff to promote community gardens. Austin Water, working hard to figure out the other huge challenge with local food production, which is, of course, water, something that you all are painfully, I am sure, aware of. Austin Water is committed to looking at how do we ensure that as we look to increasing local food production, that water is not necessarily the limiting factor. We're working on things like rainwater rebates and ensuring that community gardens have access to water and they get water taps at an affordable price. But there's a lot more to it, and I think it's really a philosophical question that we as a community are just going to have to grapple with a lot more and talk about a lot more. One of the promising trends over on the private sector side is an organization called Agua Dulce, if you're familiar with the aquaponics organization Agua Dulce, looking at basically combining hydroponics and aquaculture together in one place, producing high-quality lettuce greens for local markets while at the same time producing fish, all while using about 98% of the water from a normal farm. So maybe the future of Austin's local food production is about aquaculture. It's really probably the most sensible way to really look at increasing local food production without putting a significant greater demand on our water consumption. And then some other things, if you're not familiar with the Urban Farm Ordinance, we at the city passed last year. We now have a system called a Certificate of Compliance, where if you want to start a for-profit urban farm, we have a fairly transparent, fairly simple, not perfect, but fairly transparent and simple process so that you can understand what that means, what the constraints are, and then how to be in compliance so that you can invest in your for-profit urban farm and not have to worry about the city coming in and telling you that you're doing something that's illegal. So if you're interested in more of that information, it's all up on our website, again, at austintexas.gov/food. So I'm going to go through the rest of the slides a little bit faster, being that I think that growing section was a pretty critical part to what you guys do. But selling food, pretty exciting numbers, some interesting things. The food system has a $4 billion impact a year on our local economy. That's 4B with a capital B billion. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of things. It's basically the restaurant industry, it's the grocery industry, it's the distribution, it's manufacturing, and it's local food production. But still, it's important for us as a city to recognize that bottom number, which is a significant amount of the taxable income that we operate the city on comes directly from our food system. And so again, going back to that question of, are we over-regulating our food system? Are we squelching enterprise through overregulation? We need to be very thoughtful, if nothing else, because a lot of our income is directly tied to that food system. While we'd never want to sacrifice food safety, we still need to figure out how to ensure that we're doing everything possible to help private enterprise and help entrepreneurs be successful, recognizing that it's going to be good for everybody. The other number up there that's interesting is $737 million for food manufacturing, and that's a pretty big number too. A lot of food manufacturing happens in the city. It's not often seen in that way, but there are hundreds of local companies manufacturing food, and frankly, doing it without a whole lot of support. It's one of the things I'm very interested in doing with the city of Austin, is looking at how can we shift some of our priorities and incentivize things that will create even greater capacity for food manufacturing. What does that mean? You know, like turning kale into kale chips. It's like the thing right now in Austin. Very expensive. Anybody bought any kale chips recently? It's amazing. You can... They're really expensive, but they're really good. But you can turn one bunch of kale into a $12 product, and apparently they sell. So lots of other things, though, in food manufacturing. Some of the takeaways, though, local food is really good for the local economy. Every single time you buy directly from a local producer, you're helping your local economy, and you're helping in numerous other ways. It's something that we at the city need to take very seriously, that every single dollar that we divert from food that's imported instead being spent on local food stays in our economy numerous times. But it's also really good for nutritional issues, that when we buy local food, generally it's fresher, generally it tastes better because it's fresher. Kids generally like to eat food that has flavor and is fresh, so we're going to be able to address some of our dietary-related disease issues by getting kids to eat fresher, healthier, ideally locally produced food. Lots of things in the city, as I touched on earlier, involved with the regulation of selling food. But we also have some exciting things in terms of promoting and incentivizing local food. If you're a city employee, you can get a box of locally produced food delivered to your place of work each week through a program called Farm to Work that we partner with the Sustainable Food Center on. It's great stuff. We're looking at how to do more of that kind of thing. And then we're also looking at how to ensure that our partners in the private sector are doing everything they can, and that we're doing everything we can to help those private partners. Getting into eating food, I'll touch on this quickly. Some of the more bleak aspects of our food system are involved with eating, as well as some of the most exciting parts. So food insecurity, is that a term that you all are familiar with? Anybody not ever heard food insecurity before? It's the idea that if you're food insecure, at some point in the last year, you haven't known where the next meal was going to come from at some point or another. Either, at the end of the month, you ran out of money, or something happened with your car, you couldn't get to the grocery store. And generally, as an adult, functional adult, not that big of a deal. We've all probably had a moment where our paychecks ran thin. The challenge is with children. And we have a significant number of children in Travis County that are food insecure. About 25% of kids in our community are food insecure. And that's a pretty staggering number. When you go to an elementary school and walk down the corridors of an elementary school and realize that 1 out of every 4 kids at some point didn't know where the next meal was going to come from, again, they're not going to necessarily starve to death. But what does food insecurity do in terms of their capacity to function in that school environment? And it's a bit of a staggering equation when you start really driving into that number. Food insecurity directly relates to poor test performances. It relates directly to absenteeism and all of the other things that impact a child's performance in school. And those directly relate to their capacity as they grow older in society to function. So we have an opportunity to really address that and ensure that down the road, 30 years from now, it would be my personal aspiration that we would have 0 food insecure children in our community. And we'll circle around to some strategies for that. But again, it's a major issue, especially considering we're one of the wealthiest cities in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And yet we still have this system where we have so many children that are food insecure. And then another interesting thing is the correlation between food insecurity and obesity. And it's kind of a strange thing to think about, that kids that don't know where their next meal are going to come from are often obese. And you would think that if you were obese, you would never miss a meal. It's actually very different than that. And unfortunately, what happens oftentimes with children is when they don't know where their next meal is going to come from, when they do get food, they eat a lot of it. And when they don't know where their next meal is going to come from, they tend to eat very sugary, very sweet, very high-fat foods. And as you all know, that leads directly to some dietary-related diseases stemming from obesity. So we've got about 25% of our community is obese. Costs the state of Texas about $9 billion a year. Again, that's a big number. It's a big B. Totally preventable. Just a question of making sure that our food system works better and that the strategies for ensuring we have an equitable society are in place. So the other side of that, though, is that we've got some really exciting restaurants and an amazing set of grocery stores to offset some of that bleakness. We do have some of the best restaurants in the world. We have some of the best grocery stores in the world. Just got to figure out how to make sure that those are equitably accessible to everybody in our community. Circling back, I'm going to skip over that for the sake of time. Talk about food recovery. This is really where the food system all sort of fits back together in that cycle. Unfortunately, like everywhere in the country, and frankly, most places in the world, instead of ensuring we have that cyclical food system, we're dumping most of our food into a landfill. And that's a tremendous tragedy on a number of fronts. 421 million pounds of food, that's a lot of food. It's a lot of money, and it's incredibly impactful in our environment. One of the worst things that you can do from a greenhouse gas emissions point of view is to put organic materials in a landfill and cover it up. Causes a tremendous amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's the question of if we have people in our community that are food insecure and we're throwing away 421 million pounds of food every single year just here in the city of Austin, does that really make sense? And I would hope that you would share my perspective that that does not make sense. Fortunately, there's some great organizations, both in the public and private sector. Austin Resource Recovery is working very hard to try to figure out how to close those numbers down so that we're diverting as much of our organic material as possible. Keep Austin Fed is a great local nonprofit working on picking up unserved food from businesses and getting that to food shelters where people are hungry. You, as a landscape professional, have a tremendous opportunity to help us close some of these gaps in our food system. I would hope that you would do everything possible to keep any food as well as organic material out of the landscape world, out of the landfill world. If you haven't seen the food recovery hierarchy, it's a useful little triangle to help you understand sort of the ideal way to view food recovery and organic diversion. Food should primarily go to feed people first, and then it should go to feed animals. Then it should be used for industrial uses and for composting, and then last and hopefully least, it should end up in the landfill. But unfortunately right now, the way our current food system works, that triangle is pretty much flipped on its head with 420 million pounds of food taking up the bulk of that triangle. Lots of opportunities to change that, but it takes folks like you and we at the city working hard to make our food system work better. Again, Austin Resource Recovery is working on residential and business pilots for composting, doing lots of interesting stuff. They're on the front edge of this, though, still learning how to make all this work. Certainly not a perfected system. Fortunately, we have some great private partners as well, folks like Eastside Compost Peddlers. Is everybody familiar with Eastside Compost Peddlers? Anybody heard of that really amazing organization that are basically picking up residential and commercial organic materials, using a bicycle to get that to a local composting facility, completely energy zero. Really impressive model. A little bit challenging to think about scaling it up, but I think there's a important place for some idealism in this conversation, and I appreciate what they do. So what's next in terms of our food system? I'll be working on putting all of that stuff I just talked about into a food system report. It'll hopefully be available sometime the end of March, and hopefully we'll send out some information to our Grow Green partners about how to get access to that report, and would then love to hear your feedback on that and love to hear your ideas. I'll be working on developing neighborhood food system plans over the next couple of years, going neighborhood to neighborhood, talking about the things I've just talked about with you, hearing what people think in their neighborhoods about how to make their food system work better, and how the city of Austin can be partnering with them to help communities make their food systems better. Hopefully at some point down the road, we'll be able to aggregate some of those food system plans into a broad strategic plan about the way our food system should work, and then we'll see where that goes. I am out of time right now, though, but again, if you want to email me, that's my email. I'll leave these flyers out front if you want to grab one. I really appreciate what you guys do, and again, recognize that we at the city can't achieve our long-term comprehensive goals without working directly with private partners, professional folks. You guys are who allows us to do our job, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that you can keep doing your job and help us achieve the broad, sustainable goals that we've got. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwin, for that broad, comprehensive overview of our food system. I feel like that was a really great way to look at the rest of these talks today and how our work as landscape professionals does intersect with the food system. I think it intersects more than we at first realized. So I really do appreciate that overview. Just to keep you guys in the loop about scheduling, we've now realized the best time to take lunch would be 11:45 to 12:45. I hope that that works for everybody. I know we originally said 12:30, but we've been rescheduling speakers this morning, and we think the best time now will be 11:45 to 12:45. So if that doesn't work for anybody, I really apologize, but I hope that you'll bear with us as we try to be a bit more flexible today than normal due to the late start. So what we're doing is we're still having all the same speakers. We're just we're cutting some of those presentations a little bit shorter than normal. Eleanor is not going to be speaking until this afternoon. So if you look at the schedule here, it says that Eleanor's on right now. Instead, I'm going to go ahead and do my presentation on alternative gardening methods and alternative watering methods. And then we'll have Eleanor this afternoon and Colleen this afternoon as well. So just switching everything around a little bit, but it should still work out just fine.